The Petersons and the Whitmores lived next door to each other for nearly a decade, their lives intertwined through church gatherings, summer cookouts, and community meetings. From the outside, their suburban neighborhood looked like the epitome of success: well-kept lawns, stylish homes, and families who supported each other. Lana Whitmore, 37, was the envy of the neighborhood. With her smooth mahogany skin, striking beauty, and impeccable fashion, she turned heads wherever she went. Married to Mark Whitmore, a successful surgeon, Lana had everything. At least, that's what it seemed. But Lana wasn't just a trophy wife. She had once been a dreamer, an ambitious young woman who wanted to open her own business. She had grown up in a modest but loving home, the daughter of a seamstress and a small-time entrepreneur. Her parents had instilled in her the value of hard work, and she spent her teenage years sketching designs, dreaming of opening her own boutique. However, those dreams faded when she met Mark. He was charismatic, successful, and provided her with a life she had never known. At first, she loved the luxury, the big house, the fancy cars, the status, but over the years, it felt more like a golden cage. She had put her own ambitions on hold to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect hostess. Her days were filled with charity events, PTA meetings, and weekend brunches with the other neighborhood wives. She wore the best clothes, smiled in all the right places, and played the role flawlessly. But inside, she felt empty. The boutique she once dreamed of became nothing more than a forgotten fantasy, replaced by an aching sense of dissatisfaction. She craved excitement, adventure, something to remind her of the woman she used to be. That was when Jake entered her life. Young, reckless, and dangerously attractive, he was a reminder of the passion she had long since buried. He made her feel alive again, something she hadn't felt in years. And despite knowing the risks, she couldn't resist. Jake Peterson, 19, the son of Susan and Robert Peterson. He had always been the golden boy of the neighborhood, athletic, charming, and full of promise. But beneath his confident exterior, he harbored a darkness that no one had ever noticed. Jake had mastered the art of manipulation from a young age. He knew exactly how to make people trust him, how to charm his way out of trouble, and how to use his good looks to his advantage. Teachers adored him, girls swooned over him, and adults saw him as the son every parent wished they had. But behind his bright smile, there was something unsettling, a quiet rage, a thirst for control. Growing up, Jake was always in his father's shadow, pressured to be the best at everything. His father, a strict disciplinarian, never accepted failure. Jake learned to suppress his emotions, to wear a mask of perfection. But inside, he seethed with resentment. He despised the expectations placed upon him, the idea that his life was already mapped out. When he looked at Lana, he saw not just beauty, but escape. She was everything he wasn't allowed to have: dangerous, forbidden, and thrilling. And once he had her, he would do whatever it took to keep her. It started with something innocent. One afternoon, Jake was tossing a basketball with his friends when it rolled over the fence and landed in the Whitmore's backyard. Lana, lounging by the pool in a sleek swimsuit, watched as Jake climbed over the fence to retrieve it. She smirked as she noticed the way his eyes lingered on her curves a little too long. Jake hesitated, his fingers gripping the ball as his gaze met hers. The air between them thickened, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Lana leaned forward slightly, her sun-kissed skin glowing under the afternoon light, the sheen of water tracing the smooth lines of her collarbone. She trailed a single finger down her thigh, as if completely unaware of the effect it had on him. "You always this bold?" she teased, her voice silky smooth. Jake swallowed hard, his pulse racing. "Only when I see something worth taking a risk for." Lana chuckled, shaking her head, but there was amusement in her eyes, a flicker of intrigue she didn't bother to hide. The moment stretched, tantalizing, forbidden. She reached out, her fingers grazing the ball in his hand, but the touch lingered just a second too long. His skin burned where she touched him, his breath shallow as she whispered, "Be careful, Jake. Once you cross that fence, there's no going back." He grinned, stepping back over the fence but never taking his eyes off her. "Maybe I don't want to go back." "Careful," she teased. "You might get caught trespassing." Jake grinned, his pulse quickening. Then maybe you should punish me. It was meant to be a joke, but the tension that followed wasn't. From that moment, an unspoken attraction grew between them. Lana, who had been feeling trapped in her stale marriage, found Jake's youthful energy intoxicating. He was bold, uninhibited, and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. Late-night thoughts of him consumed her, his lingering stares, the way his muscles tensed when he moved, the heat in his eyes whenever she walked past, all of it sent shivers through her body. It was dangerous, reckless, but she didn't care. She wanted to feel alive again, to remember the passion she once had before life became routine. Jake, on the other hand, was completely enthralled by her. She wasn't just beautiful. She was sophisticated, experienced, exuding an effortless allure that made every girl his age seem dull in comparison. He craved her touch, fantasized about her lips on his, imagined what it would be like to have her all to himself. One evening, they found themselves alone again, the air thick with tension. A charged silence settled between them before Lana whispered, "You know this is dangerous, don't you?" Jake smirked, stepping closer, his voice low and full of heat. "Then why does it feel so right?" What started as flirtation soon escalated into something far more dangerous. The first time they kissed was at a block party. Mark was chatting with the other men. Susan was inside refilling drinks, and Jake and Lana found themselves alone on the back patio. One lingering look led to a stolen kiss, and from there was no turning back. The air between them crackled with tension as Jake leaned in, his breath warm against Lana's cheek. She knew she should pull away, that this was reckless, but the pull of his gaze, the intensity of his presence, made resistance impossible. His lips brushed against hers, tentative at first, but when she responded, the kiss deepened, turning hungry and desperate. Lana's fingers tangled in his short curls, pulling him closer as their bodies pressed against each other in the dimly lit corner of the patio. The distant chatter and laughter of the party faded into nothingness as they lost themselves in each other. His hands, warm and strong, traced slow, tantalizing circles along the curve of her back, igniting a fire she had long thought extinguished. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Lana stared into Jake's dark, smoldering eyes and saw her own longing reflected back at her. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, but her words lacked conviction. Jake smirked, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Then stop me." But she didn't. And in that moment, she knew. There was no stopping this now. They met in secret, hotel rooms, Jake's car, even in Lana's own home while Mark was working late. The risk made it even more exhilarating. Lana taught Jake things he had only dreamed of, and in return, he worshipped her. Each encounter was a stolen moment, a dance between desire and danger. The thrill of sneaking away, the hushed whispers, and the breathless anticipation before each meeting only heightened their passion. Lana would glance over her shoulder before slipping into Jake's car at night, her heart pounding as she felt the warmth of his touch. In the dim light of roadside motels, he traced his fingers over her skin, savoring every second as if it were their last. Lana had begun to indulge herself recklessly, using Mark's credit cards to finance her escapades. Lavish dinners at five-star restaurants, expensive suites with satin sheets and champagne. Nothing was too extravagant for their affair. She was reckless in her spending, convinced that Mark would never notice a few extra charges among his many expenses. But Mark was no fool, a diligent man by nature. He noticed the unexplained charges accumulating on their statements, hotel stays he never booked, restaurant bills he hadn't signed off on. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but suspicion crept in when he saw a charge for an intimate weekend getaway, one he certainly had not taken with his wife. Determined to uncover the truth, Mark hired a private investigator. Within weeks, the evidence was overwhelming. Photos of Lana slipping into Jake's car late at night, receipts of their lavish meals, and security footage of them entering a hotel together. His hands shook as he held the folder of damning proof, rage boiling beneath his composed exterior. Instead of confronting Lana immediately, Mark devised his own plan. He waited, watched, and plotted his revenge, setting in motion a turn of events neither Lana nor Jake could have anticipated. One evening, as they lay tangled in the sheets of a small, candlelit room, Lana pressed her lips against Jake's ear, her voice a husky whisper. "We shouldn't be doing this." Jake pulled her closer, his hands roaming over the curves of her body. But do you want to stop? She hesitated for only a moment before shaking her head. No. They knew the risks. Mark's suspicious glances, Susan's prying eyes, the constant danger of being found out. But it only made their love more intoxicating. They existed in the shadows, living for each stolen kiss, each desperate embrace, as if time itself would soon tear them apart. But the more they indulged in their passion, the sloppier they became. Text messages, secret meetings, and whispered exchanges in public. It was only a matter of time before someone found out. Susan Peterson never had a reason to suspect her best friend. She and Lana had shared everything for years, from raising kids to marriage struggles. But one night, she borrowed Jake's phone to order food, only to stumble upon a message that made her stomach drop. Her hands trembled as she scrolled up, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. Dozens of messages, some explicit, others laced with longing, revealed the horrifying truth. "You make me feel alive," Lana had written just hours earlier. And then another message sent minutes ago. "Tonight, our spot. I need you." Susan's breath hitched as she realized that Lana wasn't just playing with her son's heart. She was orchestrating an escape. A confrontation wasn't enough. This was betrayal on a level she never imagined. She glanced at the clock. If she acted quickly, she could catch them before they met. Determined, she grabbed her car keys. But she didn't know that someone else had already seen the messages too. Someone who was ready to make sure neither Lana nor Jake made it to their secret rendezvous. "I miss your touch already. Can't wait until tomorrow." The message was from Lana. Susan confronted Jake, who tried to deny it at first. But when she pressed, his face gave it away. Devastated, she showed Robert, and together, they decided to confront Mark Whitmore. At a dinner meant to be friendly, Susan exploded. "How long have you been messing with my son?" She spat at Lana, her voice trembling with rage. Mark's face drained of color. "What?" Jake, humiliated and enraged, looked at Lana, expecting her to defend him. But instead, she smirked, sipping her wine. "He was obsessed with me. I tried to tell him to stop." Jake's world shattered. She was throwing him under the bus. Jake spiraled. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The woman he loved, the woman who had told him he was special, had discarded him like trash. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. One night, he crept into the Whitmore home, knowing Mark was away for a conference. Lana woke to find him standing at the foot of her bed, his face twisted with rage. "Did you ever love me?" he demanded. Lana scoffed. "Oh, please, Jake. It was just fun. You were a distraction." Something inside him snapped. Before she could scream, his hands were around her throat, squeezing. Her nails clawed at his skin, but he didn't let go. Not until her body went limp. As he stood over her lifeless body, panic set in. He wiped his forehead, his hands trembling. He had to think fast. He quickly dragged her body to the closet, tucking her inside and covering her with blankets to buy himself some time. Then, he hurried to the kitchen, scrubbing his hands and arms to remove any trace of her struggle. Jake knew he had to create an alibi. He grabbed Lana's phone and sent a text to Mark, feeling exhausted, going to bed early. That would buy him some hours before suspicion arose. Next, he staged a break-in, knocking over a lamp, pulling open drawers, scattering items across the floor. He even pried open the back door slightly, making it seem as if an intruder had forced their way in. His heart pounded as he checked himself in the mirror. His shirt was torn, his skin bore faint scratches. He grabbed a kitchen knife and made a small cut on his arm, just enough to look like he had been attacked while trying to protect Lana. Then he dialed 911, forcing his voice into a panicked tremble. "There's been a break-in." "My neighbor's house, Lana Whitmore. I think she's hurt." As the sirens wailed in the distance, Jake steadied his breathing. He had played his part well. Now, all he had to do was stick to the story. The murder sent shockwaves through the community. The police were called when Mark returned home to find Lana's lifeless body in their bed. The sight was gruesome. Her lips tinged blue, bruises forming along her neck, and the lifeless stare in her once vibrant eyes. Mark's scream echoed through the house as he stumbled backward, dialing 911 with shaking hands. Detectives arrived quickly, combing through the crime scene with expert precision. At first, it seemed like a robbery gone wrong, as drawers had been ransacked and the back door was ajar. But something about the scene felt staged. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables missing, and Lana's expensive jewelry lay untouched on the nightstand. Forensics soon uncovered the first major clue. Jake's DNA was found beneath Lana's fingernails, indicating a struggle. A deeper dive into surveillance footage from the neighborhood revealed Jake's car parked near the house earlier that night, an anomaly considering Mark was out of town. When detectives questioned Jake, his story faltered. He claimed he had last seen Lana days before, but his phone records betrayed him, showing multiple calls and messages exchanged between them in the hours leading up to her death. The final nail in the coffin was Jake's staged injury, a shallow cut on his arm meant to suggest a struggle with an intruder. But the wound was too clean, too precise, raising suspicion. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Jake's carefully crafted facade cracked. His voice wavered, his hands trembled, and within hours of interrogation, he broke down, confessing everything. The trial was swift, the evidence was undeniable. Jake was sentenced to life in prison, his promising future destroyed. Susan, devastated, lost her son and her best friend in one tragic night. Mark left town, unable to bear the humiliation. The once thriving community was never the same again. The trial was swift, the evidence was undeniable. Jake was sentenced to life in prison, his promising future destroyed. Susan, devastated, lost her son and her best friend in one tragic night. Mark left town, unable to bear the humiliation. The once thriving community was never the same again. Years passed, but the ghost of the crime still lingered over the neighborhood. The Petersons moved away, trying to escape the shame, but whispers followed them wherever they went. Mark, broken and alone, left medicine and retreated to a quiet town where no one knew his name. In prison, Jake became a shadow of his former self. The boy who had once been full of promise now spent his days staring at the ceiling, haunted by Lana's final words. He replayed their moments over and over, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. Susan visited him once, years later. "Why did you do it?" she asked, tears in her eyes. Jake looked at her, but he had no answer. Lana had played her game too well, and in the end, it had cost them everything. The house where it all happened remained empty for years, an eerie reminder of the danger that lurked beneath perfect facades. And so, the story of Lana Whitmore and Jake Peterson became a cautionary tale, whispered among the neighbors who still remembered. A forbidden obsession that had turned deadly, leaving nothing but ghosts in its wake.